research is on fostering responsible behaviors in young children using cooperative activities. And so what you'll see in this presentation is that I worked with 7 and 8-year-olds or 2nd and 3rd graders, and there's not been a whole lot of research with young children using the responsibility model. So at the time that I had done this, there were very, very, very few, and there still are very few. So wanted to give just a little bit of background. So in just talking about, this is gonna be see if I can not trip over it. So youth essentially are exposed, at-risk youth are exposed to a lot of stress. And it's consistent over time. And so that really builds up in individual schools or individual children. And so this can essentially lead to negative life outcomes, whether that means not finishing school, whether that means poor behaviors that show out in the classroom, whether that means poor academic achievement. And so a lot of those behaviors or outcomes can manifest in children that have been exposed to this cumulative stress. And so in addition, these youth typically have limited resources and opportunities to engage in positive youth development, have positive role models in their lives. And so, sorry, I think I'm getting ahead. Yeah, okay. And so, I know the French and English part of the translation, and I have notes in English, of course. And so after school programs can be prominent ways in order for us to focus in on positive youth development. There's space, there's time to do so in these programs, where sometimes in physical education you have such a limited number of minutes in physical education that makes it a lot more challenging to do the personal social responsibility model. Although it can be done, it's just you have a much more limited time. And so with this positive youth development, or just thinking of positive youth development, it really allows us to be able to look at children as resources rather than just problems to be solved. And so I explain a little bit more about positive youth development. And it really allows for us to increase the youth's exposure to developmental opportunities. And furthermore, we focus on the student's interest, because it is about giving them choices and voices, as Sylvie noted earlier. It's also about the supportive relationship, so the children having interactions with adults that can be positive role models in their lives. And then also, it's about empowerment of kids, so providing them with the tools in order for them to be able to become responsible individuals. So Hellison's model is essentially a way to address such issues of positive youth development by providing that time and space and providing a model that gives us a framework for how to address positive youth development. And even though with the model there's, well, I shouldn't say even though, just say that it's just one such model that can address this, but also thinking about there's a lot of aspects within the model related to improving the respect towards others, increasing participation and effort, and improving self-direction and independently completing tasks. And so once again, TPSR aligns very well with positive youth development, as we are empowering children and we're focusing on the strengths and not the weaknesses of the children. Now, although there's many positive aspects and promising outcomes of TPSR, there were a couple of limitations in some of the some of the previous work, and some of which I mentioned about younger children, focusing on longer debriefs or the group time and reflection time. And so those are a couple of areas that I focused in on with my research, in using younger children as well as having a longer debrief time or the group time and reflection time more extended. So I know Sylvie went over these, so I'm just going to put them up because I wanted to address them as, even though typically they're addressed as levels or introduced as levels, by no means is this model linear in nature. So with having second and third graders, I didn't introduce them in all of these levels. That would have been entirely too complicated for them to have an understanding of the levels in the way that they're typically presented. So we focused on talking about one thing at a time. We talked about respect in 1 week, and we focused on respect the whole week. So as a way for me to introduce the levels in a more simple format for developmental purposes for the kids. And so what also we did was, in addressing those limitations, it was helpful to be able to break these down in that way. Like I said, just for students of that age, this model can be used for that, but typically it's used in middle school and high school students, which by that time, I won't say it's too late, but it's pretty advanced in there in terms of changing behaviors. And so starting with youth that are younger, I think that provides us with an opportunity for growth and for them to change their behaviors earlier so that it can follow them into adolescence and subsequently adulthood. So for the research, I posed 2 questions. I keep looking at these slides waiting for it to come in English, and so I'm looking as if I'm going to read this and I'm not quite there yet. Okay, so to what extent do children understand, make meaning of, and demonstrate the core values of TPSR? And then the second one was, how do individual factors influence the children's learning of those TPSR values? So a couple things that I wanted to point out, and I've actually said them already, so I won't go into too much detail on this, but just to know that this was an underserved population in the United States, and these children lived in a very poor school, or lived in a poor school area where they didn't meet any of the standards for schooling. So on the reading, math, science, they were all extremely low. They didn't meet the criteria that was set for national testing, right? So it's important for them to, and they also had other issues with just life circumstances that would come into play. I mean, some of the children could, they would have school closings because there's shootings going on outside of the school. Things of that nature that they had to deal with, or family members being incarcerated, things of that nature. So they had a lot of other issues that existed for them that were affecting their behaviors in school. So it was important to have a program such as this one. Once again, starting earlier, I think it's so helpful. So. So one of the reasons I talked about in terms of developing behaviors early is because we want to set the foundation of that tracking into adolescence. And so if we can set the foundation early, then hopefully we will address these issues at this point so that children really have that foundational level. And what's important is that as members of a community, we have a responsibility, and we share a responsibility in order to engage children early. And so that's really my point of doing a study such as this one, is that I feel a responsibility that as a community, we need to build children up and really be that positive role model and introduce those protective factors for children. So those things those factors that can essentially help them to be resilient in life. So, so with this in mind, that's why the population of children were chosen. So with this study in terms of the methods, I collected a bunch of data, but I'm just gonna focus on these 4 areas of data. So these were the primary methods of data collection that was used in the study. So observations, so field notes, semi-structured interviews, a researcher journal where I took notes every day after the sessions because I was involved in it as delivering the intervention, or I should say implementing the program. And so this piece, the far right, in terms of videotape lessons, that's why the lessons were videotaped, because I was the one delivering the program. And so as a result, obviously in order to take notes and things, I need to videotape myself so I can go back and look at it. And so that was another piece of the data collection. So I don't need to go over all of this other than it was just more of a way so you can see how the study was tracked and what I did in some specific weeks. But essentially, the program was delivered over an 8-week period. 2 times a week was the time frame, and it was typically about 60 minutes per time each for the 2 times per week. So by no means is that enough time for developing responsibility, but it was a very good start. And just by having lessons that were that focused in more on the group time and reflection time as a huge part of the actual program was really, I think, was very important. So I'll focus on that in just a bit. So you can look at this, but it, like I said, just kind of giving a sense of when I collected data and what types of data I collected. And so I realized that Sylvie went over this, so obviously but since it's been a little bit of a break, I'll just remind you of what they are. So with relational time, it's really just walking into the gym and getting to know your students and better as you greet them. And giving the awareness talk, as I mentioned, I didn't do a typical awareness talk because I only focused on one responsible behavior. And then the activity, which is different for most, at least from what the different research that I've read, most use some sort of sport. I decided to use cooperative activities, which I'm going to talk about in next slide or so. And that way, once you hear about that, then it just creates a non-competitive environment, which I think worked well for the younger kids. The group time, where you really talk about the activity and kind of what you did. So, and then at the end you do a reflection where not only talking about what you did within the activity, but how your behavior, what behavior did you exhibit in that behavior in terms of as it relates to yourself and as it relates to others. So let's talk about the cooperative activities, because like I said, it's a little bit different. Guidance over to the edge there. So essentially, cooperative activities are, like I said, non-competitive activities that provide really a safe use or a safe environment through the use of collaboration, trust, open communication. Typically, they include partner or group tag games, icebreaker types of activities, and really activities that allow children to be empowered through the way that we engage in those types of activities. And so by removing that competitive nature of sport, then I think it helps to build confidence within these groups. And so for instance, I'll give you an example of an activity, and I'm going to elicit some volunteers for this activity. And so if I could just get a few people up here just to kind of give you a sense of what one cooperative activity may look like. And I think this is, a typical activity where you get everybody involved. At the same time, you have to work together as a team and communicate. And so the activity is called, thank you volunteers. So the activity, thank you. So the activity is called blob tag. Has anybody ever heard of blob tag? Nope? Great. Perfect opportunity. Okay, so blob tag is, say Sylvia and I start off, and you just randomly ask 2 children if they want to volunteer, be a part of a blob. And so as I walk through, can you guys spread around a little bit?
Amoeba tag.
Okay. What'd you call it?
Amoeba tag.
Okay.
You call it seaweed tag.
You call it seaweed tag? Okay. So essentially now only Tom and me can tag people, but we have to work together in order to tag people, because if I want to go this way and Tom wants to go this other direction, that doesn't work. So we have to communicate with each other in order to work together so that we can move and tag Sarah, and then we come and we go, get away from us. And then so now we have to work together now only, so only the ends, sorry, I just want to say the ends. The end people can engage in tagging, but that means the middle people have to work with the ends, right? So, thank you. Thank you. So just that little bit, you can see how that involves everybody into the activity. There was another activity that we used called, most people know what dodgeball is, right? So what we would do is a modified dodgeball. For some reason, kids love dodgeball. I never liked it, but I modified it so that kids making it non-competitive. So if you tag somebody, I had these fitness cards, and you would go and do some sort of fitness activity, and then you're allowed back in the game. So then it makes it so that it's a continual play, and everybody is able to get involved, and it also allows for the children that aren't very good at it to continuously be physically active. And so it was things like that. It involved allowing the children some choice, because it was an activity that they really enjoyed, and me modifying it so that it can be enjoyable for everybody, for, like I said, for those folks or kids that did not necessarily enjoy it as part of their choice, but the majority of them wanted to play that. And so the reason I chose cooperative activities was, first of all, it aligns very well and marries very well with TPSR. There are some similar underlying values with both cooperative activities and the personal and social responsibility model, because both strive to engage children in positive communication, involved in teamwork, involving leadership, and so both of them, they track very nicely together when you use both of them. And I have very limited space. So you may notice, it's a little hard to see this picture with the lighting, but essentially I had half of a gym, because this was an after-school program, and because I selected 2nd and 3rd graders, the actual program is for kindergarten through 5th grade. So the kindergartners, 1st graders, 4th and 5th graders, we're on the other side of the gym. So with cooperative activities, it allowed me to have a limited space with limited equipment and still be able to engage in these types of activities with the students. And so that brings me to the group time and reflection time. We actually removed ourselves from the gym because that was a lot of noise in the gym. So we actually moved to a classroom to have these discussions. Ooh, that was fast. So we actually moved to the classroom to do these discussions. And the discussions, some of it was discussion. This was about 20 minutes. Some of them were discussions, but a lot of it was the kids drawing pictures to illustrate what responsibility looked like, some elements of responsibility. Some of it was me pulling up a giant Post-it note to talk about what does respect look like? What does it sound like? What does it not look like? And so that I can get a sense of what children, or how they understood these responsible behaviors. So there were 3 themes that emerged. Obviously, I won't go over all 3. We're just going to talk about the first one, which is connection with the responsible behaviors. Obviously, for sake of time, if we were to talk about all 3 themes, I would have taken up the whole symposium time. So we'll focus on that, and we'll actually focus on the first sub-theme within this major theme, which was essentially understanding those responsible behaviors and what they mean. And so what you'll see is that these are some quotes in terms of how kids understood responsible behaviors. And so again, I won't read all of them, but just to know that children essentially understood what respect meant, for instance, but sometimes they had a more difficult time demonstrating that respect on a regular basis. So that was a lot more inconsistent. But they can always tell you what respect meant or what it looked like. And a couple of these just talked about being kind and helpful and treating each other in the way that they wanted to be treated. And so a couple of other things, like part of the drawings was they thought respect indicated just greeting each other by saying hi, asking if you're okay. Down here to the left is sharing a ball, things of that nature, and playing together nicely is what they consider respectful. In this slide, we just talked about how I focused on a couple of kids in this particular example where you can see how I've tracked their responses in terms of what they thought about it, respect on day 3 versus what they thought about it as we moved through the study in day 12. And so as you can see with both students, they actually got a little bit more sophisticated in the way that they thought about responsible behaviors. And I thought it was important to track this. Sorry, now I'm getting carried away with okay. And I think this, over time, this is an important addition to the literature, because the tracking allowed us to see the development in the kids over time to really have an understanding of what's working. Because there's always been questions of, does TPSR work? How do you know it works? And so by having this tracking mechanism, I think was helpful in knowing that kids actually did understand it, and it got more sophisticated as the program went on. Okay, so because I only have a couple more minutes, or 1 more minute, 2 more minutes. So essentially the findings are indicating that TPSR program, it really must be adapted to accommodate children of this age group. And essentially that's by changing the lesson plan format. It's by doing maybe a different activity curriculum that focuses on like a non-competitive, so I know I'm getting there. I'll just do that. It actually focuses on something as it relates to non-competitiveness, because if you think about kids in that age group that are in underserved populations, they don't really have the skill set to probably engage in sport activities in the way that they would be focused on the skill, as opposed to focusing on the actual responsible behaviors. So by having activities that everybody can do, because everybody can, for the most part, everybody can run, or in this group, everybody can run. Everybody can help each other out in a way. So it was easier in some ways to use this without having that obstacle of having sports involved. And so essentially this is consistent with Hellison and Crothwell, Bloom, and Masia, where we're just talking about moving from that general awareness of essentially understanding responsible behaviors to really having a more sophisticated or higher understanding of the levels. And just children understood this over the 8-week period. And by using this preventative approach, it really allows us to apply a set of practices to nurture the development of children. I'll finish up. This is my last slide. Okay, so just in summary, TPSR is really a standard model in physical education, and like I said earlier, it focuses on youth being assets and not just and citizenship in life, and not as problems to be solved. And essentially with this work, it really provides that space and time for individuals to be able to develop responsible behaviors. And so Obviously, there's a lot more work to do, but if we can start at a younger age, I think that is very promising work, so that that can track into adolescence and furthermore adulthood. And so, you know, as Sylvie mentioned earlier, there's a ton of more work to do, and I hope that we can do more work as it relates to the younger children. And